Well, good morning, everyone. Today is May 6th, 2021, and welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. As many of you know, the Will Work for Food program was started last April by Natalie Armstrong-Moton, who founded it in response to the food insecurities that were becoming exhibited during the pandemic. And then Jeff Kachavan joined the program, and this started these Thursday mornings with that. And then here we go. I was honored to join in January as one of the co-moderators. So in any event, Will Work for Food is just ask that you donate to either the food bank of the person who is speaking or to a local food bank, and it's off and running. And what a difference in the world all of you and those who've attended these every single week since last April have made. So that's fantastic. Jeff, do you want to tell us what our number is today?
Absolutely, Jean. Thank you so much. Our audiences in the mediation, the alternative dispute resolution, and litigation communities have been so very generous, contributing to help fight food insecurity. Our running total so far is $104,045. That provides well over 1 million meals to people with food insecurity, not only in the United States, but all around the world. Thank you all so much for your generosity. Jean, back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. That is just so fantastic. It's amazing what a difference one person can make, isn't it? And today our speaker is Marc Harwell, a mediator from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I'll tell you a little bit about Marc. And when you talk about a person making a difference, he too had a similar idea, and as Natalie, about the need for food. And he will tell us a little bit about it. But starting May 8th of 2020, during the pandemic, he founded something called the Partnership in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And with others, then they deliver restaurants who donate meals, dinners every Friday night to families, children, and adults who are in homeless shelters, victims of domestic violence. I'll let Marc explain a little bit more about it. But as of last Friday, if you follow him on LinkedIn, they had served dinners to 1,809 people. So, these are just small little things in the puddles of life that the ripples just go out. So that's so fantastic, Marc. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. From a professional standpoint, let me just let everybody know that since 2014, you've served as a mediator, facilitating resolution in a wide variety of complex cases involving catastrophic injury, commercial motor carriers, lawsuits, employment-related disputes, construction projects, premises liability, professional malpractice, products liability, and just generally other commercial types of litigation and disputes. Marc has also worked as a trial lawyer for over 30 years and has tried over 100 jury trials and even more bench trials. He has successfully litigated cases of wrongful death, traumatic brain injury, alleged bad faith denials of insurance coverage, major commercial developments in construction, product liability involving catastrophic injury, employment-related class actions, and on and on. He is a senior director and executive committee member of the FDCC. He received the FDCC President's Award for Community Service in 2020. He served as president of the Chattanooga Bar Association and is a fellow of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. So Marc comes to us today with a very broad background and wonderful commitment to philanthropy. Marc's food bank for today is the Chattanooga Area Food Bank, and we will have that information in the chat. Marc will tell us more about that, and then put your questions in the chat, and Jeff will handle them as we move along. So it's great to see everyone. Marc, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Natalie and Jeff, and thanks for everyone who is in attendance today. Can we get some thumbs up and clapping for Natalie to celebrate her wonderful effort to feed those suffering and in need? Well done, Natalie. If you would just take less than 5 minutes to donate to your local food bank or to the Chattanooga Area Food Bank. Natalie has posted the link to the Chattanooga Area Food Bank if you want to donate to my local area, which services 20 counties in Tennessee and Georgia and feeds or provides nourishment to around 200,000 people suffering from hunger. Jane mentioned something that I started in May of 2020. And interestingly, Natalie and I must be thinking on the same page because we started our campaigns around the same time. A tornado had swept through Chattanooga in April and had devastated the area, putting people out of shelter. My wife and I had been quarantined for a solid month for reasons I won't get into. Feeling kind of low and blue about myself, and decided, what can I do to make others feel better rather than thinking about myself? So I thought, well, who is the lowest down in terms of lack of support? And I thought, well, if you're suffering from domestic violence or you've been displaced from your home by a tornado, hard to get worse than that. So I reached out to 2 local restaurants, and we have been serving professionally prepared meals every Friday evening to the victims of domestic violence and those temporarily displaced and who are located at a temporary shelter known as the Partnership. And we provided over 1,800 meals, and we'll go into our 51st week tomorrow. So if you're have any interest in that campaign, check me out at www.harwelllawgroup.com. So thank you for that. So I'm not here to preach, and I'm not here to teach. Through the chat feature, I hope that you'll share your insight into the 12 points that I intend to make with you over the course of this hour. If you have a way of framing a question or dealing with a matter in a particularly useful way, please share it with us via the chat feature. I would love to be able to go back through the chat and see your insight and wisdom into ways to bring people out, to reach true dialogue and effectuate good results. So I don't claim to have all the answers today. I just hope that what I bring to the fore fosters a good, healthy discussion via chat, and hopefully we have some time toward the end of the program to actually talk. So let me share my screen. And hopefully it'll share. Can y'all see that? No. What about now?
Yes.
That's better. Thank you.
Yes.
So I start off with the most basic concept of the first pillar, communication. You might say, wow, Mark, that's pretty obvious. Why would you start with communication? I mean, that's what we do. And I wonder, do we truly communicate? And at least in Tennessee and Georgia, and for reasons I understand, oftentimes, we no longer have opening statements. Very common practice, we don't share, or the litigants don't share position statements. Oftentimes, crucial pieces of information are just left to be dumped upon the adversary on the day of mediation with no time to truly consider it. How can we achieve resolution without good dialogue and a reasoned exchange? I'm gonna go off course here and do something that's kind of risky, but I'm gonna talk about the greatest communicator as far as me for just a couple of minutes. We go back to Gettysburg, November 19, 1863. I'm only gonna remind you of the first sentence and just part of the last sentence, so bear with me. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all people are created equal. Part of the last sentence. From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. that we here highly resolve that these dead shall have not died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. In just 2 minutes, Lincoln redefined the purpose of the Civil War. In the first sentence, he insists that the country has been dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In the last line, he insists that the nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. The restoration of the Union as it was under an imperfect constitution was no longer enough. The Union now sought for emancipation, which was more than the military cost that Lincoln had proclaimed at the start of that same year. The genius of the speech to me is that he states as a core value an inspirational basis for the Union cause that excludes no one. His speech is not directed for or against anyone. He never names a side. He never references the North or the South. He never references Unions or Confederates. He never mentions an enemy. He says nothing about slavery. He doesn't explain the cause of the war, doesn't analyze anything about the battle itself, doesn't name any particular office or service member. What is my point? Choosing the right words and setting a good tone is essential to helping the parties diffuse a fight, meaningfully engage, and seek resolution. So my question to you for the chat is, what have you found to be most effective in dealing with issues that are highly emotional or highly charged? Point number 2, listening. Recently had a mediation. The attorney insisted at the last minute on an opening statement with a video presentation. The adversary, throughout the entire presentation, focused on a computer screen without giving any apparent attention to the presentation. It's a pretty bad start. The attorney who gave the opening statement was pissed off because the adversary wouldn't listen. The party who focused upon the computer screen was pissed off for having to sit through an opening that he didn't want to hear. Had another case recently, an experienced adjuster, and these are hard. The experienced adjuster had worked hard to handle a claim. He'd worked from the claim from start to mediation. And then that same adjuster was tasked by the carrier as handling the settlement of the insurance claim at mediation. So effectively, the adjuster was being asked to relent on points that the plaintiff was making, which would understandably be a difficult situation for that adjuster. How long have I been muted? Okay.
Just a few
you've
seconds.
been fine.
All right. The adjuster, I was talking about an adjuster who was tasked with handling an insurance claim from start to mediation, and that same adjuster is tasked with basically settling the case at mediation, which would effectively mean giving in to a plaintiff and a plaintiff's attorney that he'd been battling with for over a year. That's a hard place to be. When we try to change a person's mind, our first, at least my first impulse had been to preach about why I'm right. I'm an advocate, first, back in the day. Or prosecute another for being wrong. Yet the psychological studies have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that preaching and proselytizing typically backfire. And when they don't actually sway a person, they actually strengthen that person's beliefs. Through motivational interviewing or Socratic questioning, we can help people find their own motivation to change or to think scientifically, So what my favorite style, and I'd love to hear from y'all, but I like to ask the how question rather than the why question. I like to ask how rather than explain. How do you think a jury will react to the plaintiff's professional engineer and to the plaintiff's general contractor? How do you think their position might be defeated or diminished? How do you think your adversary is going to react to that number? And is that really the response that you want to achieve your goal? How is your position advancing your stated end game? Ask that rather than why are you wedded to that position? Doesn't that put somebody on the defensive? If you can get people to truly explain the adversary's position and possibilities, I think you have an improved chance of getting them to grasp the complexity of the problem and recognize alternatives. I like to ask open-ended questions or not blatantly leading questions, and to listen more carefully. I like to hold up a mirror so that people can see matters more clearly and perhaps see problems or weaknesses. I used that how feature in a mediation just a couple of days ago, and it worked marvelously. The advocate was just so ingrained in a battle that had been fought for over a year. Good, strong positions, reasoned positions, grounded with good experts, but it wasn't going to achieve the goal. And by asking, how do you think a jury may reasonably respond to what your adversary's experts say? It kind of changed because it got emotional. It got to his gut. I said, I think sincerity is the most crucial part of asking the how question and engaging in the dialogue, because if the person you're speaking with doesn't believe that you truly care, that you're having a genuine inquiry about where they're coming from, then I think you'll lose the credibility that you need in order to foster that discussion. Ask for elaboration. Use positive reinforcement to encourage more engagement. A lot of those points came from The Science of Reasoning with Unreasonable People that was published in the New York Times in January 31, 2021. Next point, timing. Timing is everything. I'll tell you a story. At around 4 o'clock in the morning in March a few years ago, a trauma nurse at a local hospital left the ER for her home. The chief trauma surgeon had nicknamed her Mother Teresa. I was appalled when I first heard that, because that's an icon. You don't use that iconic name. And then he explained, Mark, that name actually came from the chief trauma surgeon, because she was known to paint the fingernails of homeless women and to wash the hair of homeless men. No more argument from me. 45 minutes after leaving the ER, she returned to the ER on a stretcher after having run into a dropped metal box on the highway in the dark of the night. She died on the operating table and left 5 children and a loving husband. Her wrongful death case settled, or claim settled, several months before the anniversary of her death. Were depositions needed to get it settled? Not in that case. Liability was clear, and the attorneys were working at a really, really high level. The stage was properly set for an early resolution because of the way that both sides handled the case. There was a free exchange of information. There were sincere apologies. There were voluntary payment of funeral expenses without any strings, without being asked to do so, and so on. So every case is different, but we all have to ask ourselves, what are the nuances of this case and what do I need? Do I need time? Where are they in the 5 stages of grief? Has there been enough time pass? How much needs to be done in order to truly evaluate the case and fairly evaluate the case? Never forget being criticized trying to get to an early mediation as an advocate. And I was told by the mediator that the plaintiff didn't appreciate me because I hadn't taken the time to take their depositions. I specifically asked the attorney, is this timing right? Are they ready? Do we need to go through discovery? No, Mark. It's just an example of, I don't think you can talk enough to counsel to find out, where are your clients? Are they ready? What do we need to done? And what do we need to arm the mediator with so that he or she can be an effective mediator? Pillar 4 for me, got to be the voice of reason, right? I was at a charitable event yesterday and ran into a retiring judge, and he's told me that he intends to move into mediation, wants to talk to me about it. I said, well, you'd be great at it. And he told me, he said, you know, Mark, he said, one of the things I found interesting over the years of seeing you litigate before me is how well you treat the plaintiff's counsel and their case. And I said, well, Jeff, I figure if I'm not being abundantly honest with them, then nobody's going to believe anything I have to say. And I believe that as a mediator and as an advocate. For advocates in attendance, take off your advocacy hat. Take it off for the mediation. You're not wearing it for the mediation. You've already done that before, and you're going to do that after it doesn't resolve. According to a Wharton professor, Adam Grant, he says there are 4 modes of thinking, and I think he might be right. He says there's the preacher, the prosecutor, the politician, and the scientist. The preacher. When we're in preacher mode, we're convinced we're right. Fine. When we're in prosecutor mode, we're trying to prove someone else is wrong. When we're the politician, we're trying to win approval. When we're the scientist, when we're thinking like a scientist, you favor humility over pride and curiosity over conviction. Grant explained, you look for reasons why you might be wrong, not just reasons why you might be right. As a mediator, don't we have to get the parties to see how they might be wrong or not exactly right? Pillar number 5, according to Harwell. Control. On this point, I recommend a book that I found to be quite helpful and interesting called Crucial Conversations. It's not a long read. It's an effective read for me. At least it helped me. And one of the principal points is, don't you have to control your emotions in order to control your dialogue? I can never speak as well when I'm emotional. And I don't think advocates can speak well or engage in good dialogue when they're emotional either. So it's crucial upon the mediator and for the advocates to take measures to create an environment of safety. And when you feel safety being compromised or safety being violated, step back. Take any number of measures that can help secure the calm. And don't get me wrong, there's a process I truly believe. There's a wear and tear, a wear down process that goes on through the course of the difficult mediation. And I get that. But there's a line there. And when you see that line being crossed or approaching that line, step back, smile, take a break, offer a walk around the block. I recently handled a mediation. We were well into the day. Plaintiff had gotten tired. She saw that her expectations were just not going to be met, and she started to cry, and she wanted to leave. It came on really suddenly, or perhaps I just didn't see the cues because there were so many people in the room and I'm making excuses. Perhaps I didn't see the cues, but she started to cry. Well, who likes to see that? And that's really not conducive to mediation. So I said, oh, let's stop. I'm gonna take a 30-minute break. If that's enough, I want you to take a walk around the block or do whatever you need to get out of this environment for the next 30 minutes and come back to me. She came back. We had some kind discussion, and that case settled. Tenuous though. Pillar number 6, on being in the realm of reason. Y'all talk about the realm of reason. I think you probably do. I mean, so many times I talk about ballparks, and so many times it seems like it's an epidemic of everyone playing the start of the mediation outside of even the parking lot of the ballpark stadium. You start with numbers that don't make any sense. They just don't make any sense. I remember when I was working as an advocate, it was a traumatic brain injury case. Policy limits were $500,000. My defendant didn't have a pot to pee in. The plaintiff knew that, had allowed him access to records just to prove the point to take it off the table. Still first demand out of the gate was a $1 million demand. I said, you've seen the policy. You've seen the financials. You truly want to engage in a meaningful discussion? You're going to start $500,000 over policy limits today? I was pissed as an advocate. Frankly, the mediator wasn't too happy either. Told the mediator to go back in that room and tell him that's just absolutely asinine. It's completely stupid, and I'm not responding to stupid. And then before I made him go back and deliver that harsh message, I gained control of my emotions. I said, don't do that. I said, I'm pissed, but don't do that. I said, do this. I said, we'll stay in our chairs and we will engage in mediation today, but I want a bracket. And for me to stay in my chair, you're going to have to come in somewhere under $500,000. And I frankly don't care if it's $499,999, but we're not going to talk above policy limits. We're at policy limits today. And it worked. Everyone calmed down. But it's funny, after the case settled, the plaintiff, she looked at me and she said, that was a really stupid place for us to start. So it maybe gave me some validation, and I am glad that I wasn't so harsh in the response. Respect. And I think about respect, I think the two best examples I have from my historical mind, I think of Ulysses Grant and Robert E. Lee at Appomattox, and think how these two great fighters, these warriors who, fighting for their causes, be it wrong or right, actually were able to sit down in a room together, discuss peace and discuss reconciliation. And our advocate warriors mimic that kind of behavior at a mediation. I like to tell a story about a small little town where there lived a man who couldn't see and who was all alone. He was blind, yet he carried a lamp with him whenever he went out at night. And one night when he was returning to his home alone, in the dark of the night, he came upon a group of young travelers. He saw a blind man carrying a lamp and started making fun of him, saying, "Stupid old man, why are you blind yet carrying a lamp?" He said, "Well, I am blind, but I carry this lamp so that you can see me and not do me harm." What's my point of that little parable? Be careful before you judge others. Try to be polite when you're in the context, at least of a mediation. Try to see the other person's point of view. Fair enough? Fair enough? Number 8. Be flexible. Try to be innovative. Circumstances change, don't they? Until you try it. And even during trial, circumstances change. A few weeks ago, I mediated a construction and insurance coverage case. And the defense had a general counsel who was well respected in that small town where the case would be tried. And the defense was understandably impressed and even enthusiastic about the testimony they expected to get from that general counsel. You know what happened at mediation? Plaintiff's attorney, who's a pretty high-powered lawyer in that small town, disclosed that the GC was now his client. My, how things change. I recently mediated a traumatic brain injury case, which was, I think I had tried so many of them as an advocate. So when I saw that the defense advocates were having a difficult time evaluating this TBI case, I understood. It became apparent that just the preparations hadn't been adequate just for that day. So we developed a game plan, a 60-day plan to resume suspend and resume, with actual plans going forward, and with minimal expense and relatively minimal time being lost toward the effort of resolution through settlement. And we got it settled. They needed that time. They needed to rethink. again, we go back to communication and listening, and being flexible and recognizing that it doesn't have to settle that particular day. Lord knows we want it to, but if it takes another 45 or 60 days to do a little bit more listening and a little bit more communicating, so be it, right? This is obvious, but I can't really have this presentation in good conscience and not at least talk about this element, right? Especially when we're talking about 12 pillars of mediation that y'all are so enthralled in knowing, right? So being knowledgeable, obviously, it's just run through the nuts and bolts. I mean, what has subrogation been notified? Where are the parties in dealing with liens? Are there third parties that have been brought into litigation that need to be brought into litigation? Are there excess carriers truly involved, and have they been adequately notified? All the legal issues wrapped up, tidied up, or what do we need to talk through at the mediation to get on point, to get on page? The most frustrating mediation I've ever attended as an advocate involved a construction an insurance coverage case. This is years ago, and I can't even remember what the stupid insurance principle was, but it was so basic. And adversary and the mediator, who obviously will go unnamed, wasted 3 hours of time talking about the most basic insurance principle, completely off base, completely wrong. It's a summary judgment issue, like bang the gavel without any discussion, really. 3 hours to talk about that, and they no intimation at all that something that obvious was going to be such a factor. Killed the mediation. And my client were so incensed I couldn't get them calmed down because they felt like they'd lost so much time and wasted so much time. I was a little taken back because I was surprised that we were wasting so much time talking about such a basic point. But I guess the point of that is, again, we go back to communication, and that's just an example, I guess, where either I failed or somebody failed, but it could have been handled a lot better. This is one I don't see often enough as a mediator. I wish I would see it more often. I think sometimes, and I've probably been victim of it too, you fight as an advocate. You fight. And it's hard to take off that hat when you walk in the mediation room and all of a sudden you have to start listening, empathizing, thinking, conceding, recognizing, sharing. But if there's time to be candid with your adversary, if there's time to work together, Lord knows, shouldn't they do that? Shouldn't we as mediators encourage that kind of candid exchange? I mean, how can you two work to get this medical expense lien holder? How can you work to get that resolved, or this worker compensation lien resolved? Once you work together, isn't it in your best interest? Why have you not done this yet? Can we not get through that now? So I think being candid is part of this whole communication spectrum, and it's about the engaging in true dialogue. And number 11, I'm being realistic. I said every offer. I'm going to take that back. I think most offers and most demands should be grounded in some tie to reality to the extent that it reasonably can be, right? I mean, where is this number coming from? You say $400,000, but how do you get there? Will you help me understand how you get there? Or why are you stuck at $60,000? How? And again, I'm talking to y'all today. I would ask the how question, not the why question. How do you get there? And how do you think a jury will recognize the proof of your opponent in respect to that particular point? When I said that, but I do like it when demands and offers are linked to understandable elements of the damages and understandable elements of the liability spectrum. One reason I said I'll take it back on every is, I think if you're dealing with somebody who's super technical, who seems to gravitate to 1 foot above the ground, 2 feet above the ground, and then I think that take it back, because the case isn't going to be tried 1 foot above the ground or 2 feet above the ground. The jury's not going to listen to that kind of detail. Case isn't going to be tried. If it is tried that way, God bless you. Haven't run across many jurors that are going to roll up their sleeves and get that deep in the ugly details with you. Maybe y'all are better advocates than I am, but I usually think the juries want an overall understanding of what they perceive to be fair and reasonable, gut check time, and how does it all play out. So when I'm dealing with a very technical person who's been wedded to the technicalities of it, then I think it's mediator's role to try to change that perspective and to get them to voluntarily change their perspective. And that takes some nuance and skill, because it requires you to not preach. It requires you to not ask that why question that simply oftentimes reinforces what he or she has been wedded to over the course of the case or the claim. And who wants to hang out with a person who's always the smartest person in the room? Not me. Anybody on the screen nodding their head they want to be with that person? Right? Tell you a story. This team went to the NCAA Men's March Madness tournament ranked last, number 64 out of 64, and just a couple months ago. In the first round, this team played Ohio State, who was seeded number 2 in their bracket. According to the Las Vegas odds makers, the experts, the smartest people in the room, Ohio State was a 15.5-point favorite to win. The experts got it wrong. The smartest person in the room didn't get it right. Oral Roberts went on to beat Ohio State in overtime and went on to win the second round against Florida, who was number 7 seed. So the smartest people in the room got it wrong, not once, but twice. That's why cases are tried. And if you're the advocate and you're always the smartest person in the room, you probably need to find a new mediator, or maybe take a reevaluation of why you keep running into the same results and having the same problems. I'll end with a little story about a doctor, a lawyer, a priest, and a little boy who were out on a Sunday afternoon flight in a small private plane. And the plane developed engine trouble all of a sudden. And despite the best efforts of the pilot, the plane started to fail. It was going down. Worst pilot in the history of the world. He didn't stay with the ship. He grabbed a parachute and jumped out. Encouraged everybody, the priest, the doctor, the boy, and the lawyer to take a chute and jump. Problem was, there were only 3 chutes. Well, the doctor grabbed one of the chutes and jumped out. When as he left, he says, "I'm a doctor, I save lives, so I have to go." The lawyer, he grabs a bag and he says, "I'm a lawyer. Lawyers are the smartest people in the world, and I don't deserve to die today." The priest looks at this little boy. He said, "I've lived a long and good life. Yours is just getting started. You take the chute." The little boy looks at the priest. He said, "The smartest person in the world just jumped out with my backpack." So I'll end on that note. I know that I'm maybe a few minutes ahead of time, but also wanted some time because I'm not by any stretch of the imagination the smartest person on this call. Not even close. I don't think I can teach Jean Lawler anything in the world. I might be able to share something with her and learn from her, and I might impart something to her that she'd value, but I'd rather get back into the discussion and see what y'all want to talk about with me.
Oh, Mark, thank you so much. I have learned so much from you. In fact, I wrote down how questions, and I'm going to make that front and center and first out of my mouth on many more occasions than they have been in the past. So thank you for everything. Good job. It's a thrill. So we may as well, how about if I turn it over to you, Jeff, then, and we can go to the questions. And thank you so much for everyone for your generosity. I see people putting amounts in the chat and all. That's great. Whatever it is you want. And let's get back to Mark. So Jeff?
Yes, Mark, thank you so much. A most informative and insightful, really deep presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let me ask you one question that everybody thinks about a lot these days is the impact of the online environment, Zoom and the other online platforms, on what we do as mediators and what we do as advocates. So let me ask you, from your observation and your experience, what are some of the differences? What are some of the things people are doing well, the adaptations that are good, and what are some of the adaptations that maybe are not so good for both mediators and advocates as you have observed them?
Well, Jeff, it's a great question, and I get that often, and I'm getting it from the advocates. I guess maybe because I'm talking to advocates more than mediators about the subject, so that's why I enjoy this Thursday so much, because I've got so many mediators to talk to and learn from. Personally, I have found success rate to be equal on a Zoom platform versus in person. I've not. I have, my percentages are essentially the same. I think the only frustration that's been voiced to me, not about me, but about prior experiences, and hopefully they were early on, was just frustration with technical difficulties. But if you can make sure that everyone on the call, on the platform, whether it be GoToMeetings or Zoom or some other, are really well connected. It's the connectivity and the mediator's effective use of it. I mean, popping in and out of closed sessions via Zoom, it's faster than it is in person. It's just very quick and effective. And I haven't really felt or experienced a fatigue factor in mediation like I can in a really long-term deposition. I don't know what the difference is, and I don't know if I'd like to hear from others if they've experienced a similar situation. I mean, a 2-3 hour deposition, 4 hour deposition, again, doesn't bother me. If I start getting into 6-7 hour depositions, I tend to get a little bit tired of it. Maybe that's just me personally, but
Okay, Mark, let me ask you just about some of the basic things mediators talk about all the time. We'd love to have your views. Let's talk about the beginning and the ends of mediations. The beginning, joint sessions. Do you ever have them? Do you never have them? What are the circumstances which determine whether a joint session is appropriate at the beginning of a mediation? What do you like to do as a mediator to help ensure that the joint session is going to be successful?
I don't have the open statements very often. The attorneys tend to not want to do them anymore after some experiences that I've had. And then it always, the bad apple kills the whole experience for everyone else. But I've just had some attorneys that just couldn't take off their advocacy hat, forgot where they were and what their objective was. And then you're calling somebody down. That's not a good way to start. So in a few situations, I think that they're important. If it's a highly charged emotional case with clear liability and the defense simply wants to meet and sincerely apologize, express condolences. I mean, I had an adjuster break down in tears when she met the wife of the decedent. It was just absolutely genuine. Hell, it made this 32-year lawyer tear up. I thought I was going to cry. It was I hate to say it was effective because that sounds like it was just a mercenary, but it was true and it was real. And she really wanted to meet that mother. She's a mother, she's a wife. She wanted to meet her and just say, I'm so sorry for what happened. A company didn't intend for that to happen. We want to do what we can to make it right today. That kind of thing is always, if it's sincere and it's real, it works. But, if you have something like that and you have anybody that wants to put their adversary hat on and engage, and that's just fire and water, it blows up and it's terrible. So
That moving moment, Mark, was that in person or was that on an online platform?
it was in person. And again, I think it set, the tone had been being set all along. That was just kind of that was the final thing that really needed to be done, really, for both parties. And that's why it was so successful, because I think the plaintiff's, the wife needed to hear that. The decedent's wife needed to hear that. And the client representative truly wanted to voice it. And I would never stand in the way of that kind of good emotion. That's good exchange. That's good emotional dialogue.
And do you think that can be replicated in an online platform? Would it come across the same?
That's a great point, Jeff. And I've not had occasion to experience that. So I'm going to say I don't know. I have some thoughts on it, because since I have a good experience with this platform, and I can look people in the eyes and I can see a lot of mannerisms, where your shoulders are, where you're, whether you're, are you like this? I can see if you're back. I can see a lot. You can see a lot, and so I think you can read a lot. Is it close as in person? Of course not. But the more we get used to this platform, and I think we're all very used to it, I think we recognize the opportunities that it provides, and we can see the limitations. And I would think that if you if I were to put those two on a screen right now and they had it, would it be as effective? No. Probably can't see the tears as well. Can't see the blushing, the redness in the face, the shaking, probably can't see that as well. But if it's all you got and it's going to be real and it's going to offer up good dialogue and it's the best you got, then I'd say go with it. Jean?
Jeff, if I might interject, I had that situation happen on a Zoom mediation. It was an auto accident case, and the one side was debating about whether just to take the uninsured motorist coverage or not, or go after personally the other person who hit them. And there had been the loss of a child, and it was heartbreaking. And a husband and wife on one side and then a family on the other side. And I was able to bring them together into the same Zoom room. We went back and forth a few times, but I brought them back and they talked to each other and they were in tears. And the one wife who'd had a miscarriage after this came in, and, the other wife was, sympathetic. It still gives me goosebumps to think of that. And one of the lawyers afterwards said, wow, I've never seen anything like that. So I would say it can happen.
Jean, do you think it could have happened a year ago when people were first acclimating themselves to these online platforms?
Well, this was early on. I'd say this was the late spring of last year, maybe the beginning of summer. And these people had no experience doing Zoom, that's for sure. So it was not a normal thing for them. So I would say yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Mark, let me ask you another question that came up in my mind during your very fine presentation. Is when you don't have a joint session and people don't exchange their mediation statements, there are things that are out there for which they certainly want to get credit in the negotiation, but they seem reluctant to disclose to the other side points that will bring them more money or save them money, as the case may be. How do you encourage people to disclose things which actually might benefit them in the negotiation, but which they seem reluctant to disclose?
Well, it's, engaging in just a frank discussion with the individual attorney. And it happened to me not too long ago, where the attorney had done a marvelous workup with an expert and shared that wonderful workup with the expert. And I looked at it and I go, huh, I don't think this has been shared. So I called up the attorney and said, have you shared this with the adversary counsel? And he goes, no. I said, will you please now, today? And the attorney thought about it, and I explained why I thought it was so crucial to the conversation. It was. And the attorney did. And it was such a big piece of the puzzle. That was one where I had doubts that it was going to resolve, given the immediacy of the upcoming mediation. And it didn't, but it didn't fail. We suspended it, and we're going to resume it, and hopefully get it resolved. But I think just picking up the phone and saying, I really think you should share it for the following reasons. Help me understand where you are on this. How do you think it would harm you? How do you think it would harm your position? Wouldn't it only help your position? Wouldn't it only help the discourse? If you truly believe that, and again, sincerity is everything. And that's why it's so easy to pick up the phone on that example. I was just going, this has got to be shared. This is so important to both parties getting a fair understanding about where this can go.
And you try to do that before the mediation day where possible, I assume?
Yeah. I mean, I got it just a few days before the mediation, and
Yeah.
fortunately it was shared the same day. It was shared with me in response to the call. It was shared, but I think I think I'm going to say I don't know what y'all do, but I think I can do maybe a better job of trying to get counsel to understand how much time some companies need to take in information, understand information, and roundtable it, because it's going to be roundtabled. And if it's not shared, 30 or 45 days in advance, then it's already been roundtabled. Minds already get set in stone, and then you're working like the devil to undo the setting, and it's creates more work. So I think when I get off the call, I'm going to start changing my letter to say, would you please exchange, crucial pieces of information with the adversary voluntarily, no later than 30 days in advance of the mediation. I'm not insisting on it, but I strongly encourage it.
Mark, now let's turn to the back end of the mediation, closing techniques. People are always interested in hearing expert mediators' views on closing techniques, particularly mediators' proposals. That always generates a lot of discussion. Is it common, rare in your practice to use them, and how do you design them to be successful if you do use them?
I try not to use them unless it's absolutely insisted upon, and I feel like we've just reached the end of the rope on both sides, and there's just it's kind of a break glass moment, which I consider to be a personal shortcoming when it gets to that point, because I really want to be the facilitator. And if I have to start being the dictator, then I feel like, well, why am I now the center of the conversation, the center of the discussion, which is not someplace that I try to be. I try to, again, if I'm asking the right how question and I'm making the parties think, truly think and engage, then I'm hoping that they're not gonna, it's not gonna get down to that. Now, I'm not telling you I won't share my opinion when it gets to 11th hour about where that realm of reason, in my opinion, is, and if they're still way outside the realm of reason, how can you not understand the frustration point given your position at this stage of the day? I mean, how can you not take into account this, or are you taking into account this? What are you thinking about when they have this proof that's forthcoming? So I guess in answer to your question, I like to avoid. I'll do it if push absolutely comes to shove. but it's not something I really I often do. I'd like to know what other people think in that regard. Gene?
Oh, put me on the spot here.
I am.
Yeah, you are. Personally, I am not a fan of mediators' proposals. I like to have them do the work and do the job. And you know, even when I'm pushed, I just feel like at times they're mediating to get to the mediator's proposal position, as opposed to mediating to control it themselves and accomplish, you know, a settlement. And it's so difficult when you know that one side only has probably, you know, a range of, you know, X, you know, A to B, and the other side is way over and, you know, Y to Z, and neither one of them is going to be in the range. I don't know. I will do them. I've done them a couple of times when pushed, but I try to avoid them generally, and encourage the parties, you know, doing it in a way where I encourage the parties to take control of their own lives, their own destinies, and continue to work with them to get to a point where they reach a settlement, and that they've done that work and not just relied on a mediator's proposal.
Thank you. Mark, let me ask you, we have time for one last question, and Natalie, you know, is the world's greatest marketing guru for mediators and arbitrators. So let me ask you a marketing related question. You're a defense guy. You've been involved in the Federation of Defense and Corporate Counsel. You're known as being on the defense side of the aisle. In your practice, how did you and how do you personally gain and maintain credibility with the plaintiff's bar? That you will be fair to them, your process will be fair to them. And how do you recommend to others? You've also been president of the Chattanooga Bar and in many sort of nonpartisan positions, shall we say. But how do you recommend to the rest of us who haven't had the honor of serving in those kinds of positions to establish credibility with people who are on the other side of the aisle from where we may have practiced?
Well, Jeff, that's a great question. And since I've been really working hard to develop my mediation practice more and more and more, that was a concern of mine when I really started going full bore that way. And the answer to the question is, you live and die by your reputation. And for the young lawyers that are on the line who've been practicing a year, 2, 3 years, think long and hard about what you want your adversaries to think about you 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road. Because once you've developed your reputation, it is set in stone. It doesn't change very much. And so fortunately, Jeff, I've always treated my brethren on the other side of the V with great respect. I've fought them like hell, but it's always been at a really high level. And they've known it's, and I guess, so I had an awful wrongful death case that I was defending, and it was the plaintiff had retained counsel and across the state. The attorney didn't know, plaintiff's counsel didn't know me from Adam. Plaintiff's counsel called a local attorney who's a plaintiff attorney, and I found this out 6 months after the case settled. And he goes, "I heard you got that case settled." I go, "How did you know about that?" He goes, "I helped you get it settled." What are you talking about? He goes, "Yeah, plaintiff's counsel called me up, said that you wanted to do a mediation and you wanted to do it without discovery. And he was really reticent to do it. And I told him, I said, if Marc Harwell tells you it is so, then it is so. You can trust him, and I would recommend that you move forward with him." So, I've got to, somehow I've done it, but I've gotten my plaintiff brethren to trust me and know that though I'm a worthy advocate, I'm a fair advocate. And so they've accepted me as a neutral and know that, now my reputation lives and dies by whether I maintain credibility as a neutral. And so that's heartfelt to me and not going to be compromised in any way, shape or form.
Sound advice. And our time is just about up. Thank you, Mark. It was such a treat to meet you. You and I'd never met before. Jean, thank you so much for bringing Mark to us and for allowing me to monopolize a question and answer. So, Jean, with that, back to you.
Oh, thank you. That was wonderful. And thank you, Jeff. And thank you so much, Mark. It was a pleasure. We've all learned something here today. And congratulations to you on your good work. Thank you for your good work with the feeding of the folks in Chattanooga and now around the world. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. We will see you next week. Thank you for your generosity, and please feel free to let Natalie or any of us know the amounts if you want, and we'll add it to the total. No pressure there. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.